Ozempic has ballooned into a popular weight loss drug with celebrities, physicians, activists, and even the media promoting its benefits. Not because it may be effective, but because they're being paid by drug maker Novo Nordisk. New reporting from investigative journalist Lee Fang sheds light on how the media has failed to disclose the potential health risks of the new trendy medication and also the financial ties between the pharmaceutical giant and those who are helping to aggressively push the wonder drug.
Here to break his reporting down is Lee Fang himself. Lee, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, why don't you give us a rundown of which celebrities we should look out for? Who needs the sponsored Instagram post?
Well, look, this is a story about a new class of drugs. These are GLP drugs. They essentially imitate a hormone that regulates insulin. Originally intended as a diabetes drug. That's how it was first approved in 2017. It's now taken off as a weight loss drug. There are kind of profound studies and evidence showing the assistance it can provide for diabetics, and this could be a game changer in saving a lot of lives. But the drug makers, Novo Nordisk, and now other companies that are getting into this market, they're looking at the epidemic of obesity in America. 100 million Americans, something like 44% of adults, are struggling with obesity, and they're seeing dollar signs. So they're hoping to create a market focused on obesity rather than diabetes as a focus. And one way that they're doing this is shaping the media coverage of how people talk about weight loss, how they talk about obesity. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of media articles in the last 2 years that quote physicians, patient groups, activists, civil rights organizations, consumer rights organizations, the list goes on. And the media is failing to disclose that these are individuals and organizations that are funded by the companies that stand to benefit. And this could be really one of the biggest financial windfalls of all time for big pharma. Just to give you a perspective of how big this market could be, JP Morgan recently did an estimate that within 10 years, the GLP market could be worth something like $80 billion. That's more than the revenue of Pfizer's vaccine at the peak of the pandemic. And this is very different than a vaccine because the vaccine is essentially a one-time event. These drugs, you have to for the benefit, you have to stay on them on a monthly basis, perhaps for life. The benefits go away immediately if you get off of them. So this is a huge potential cash cow for big pharma. So they're investing heavily in lobbying, public relations, and advertising, often missing the potential downsides of this drug. We don't know all the full effects for weight loss. There are some very serious side effects that are now being reported. People reporting stomach paralysis, difficulty digesting, potential cancer risk. And the simple fact is that for anyone considering this, we have this American issue where people consult their advertisers, the media, rather than really talking to their doctor and figuring out what's the appropriate intervention for them.
So I am very sympathetic to the concern around drug advertising. Most countries do not allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise direct to the public. We used to not allow that in the country. That was part of one of the wonderful innovations of deregulation that we now enjoy and have to contend with marketing for bladder and colon issues when you just want to watch an episode of Star Trek late at night. But all of that aside, it does seem to be evident that the drug is effective for a large percentage of users. Some people do experience side effects, but that is not uncommon for any number of drugs. So what is the concern here? There does also seem to be a lot of organic interest in this drug, as it is one of the first, if only, proven effective drug that gets at this weight loss crisis, which you rightly describe as an epidemic. How do you tease out what is kind of an organic public interest in what seems like a miracle drug from targeted advertising, which is perhaps not fully disclosing side effects?
This drug could be very beneficial to people struggling with obesity as well. I don't want to have, I want to be very clear about that. But when we look at any type of new pharmaceutical intervention, We need to have a very clear-minded view of this. We need to have transparency in the debate. If you have an advertisement, at least we have these regulations that require disclosure of who paid for the advertisement. There has to be a tagline at the end. But there's no such regulation or rule for the media. You look at these dozens, if not hundreds, of news articles, broadcasts, radio, in some cases social media, promotion of these drugs, touting the drug and its dazzling benefits without any disclosure or discussion of the potential risks. And they're quoting physicians who are, incredibly credible experts or patient advocacy groups or other very kind of well-esteemed or credentialed organizations. And there's no disclosure that they're paid by the manufacturer, that they're, in some cases, they're actually working on behalf of some of these trade groups and public relations firms that are lobbying every day on Capitol Hill to expand, the Medicare coverage and some of the payment issues around these GLP drugs. I think that's the problem. We have a system that's clouded by money, by lobbying. We need to have a more patient-focused, a physician-focused approach to medicine in this country.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, Lee, when I hear something being touted as a wonder drug or a miracle drug, my alarm bells immediately start going off. I think this has got to be too good to be true. And just as a journalist, I get these emails on a continuous basis from both PR sides of this. From one side, talking about the amazing benefits of drugs like Ozempic, and then I get emails saying that there are concerns about fertility or stomach issues and some of the other side effects that you mentioned. And I was just hoping maybe you could speak to how well these drugs have been tested in the long term, right? Because as you said, their effects wear off immediately when you stop taking them, and some people are staying on them for, it seems, longer and longer periods of time. So what is the background in terms of long-term side effects and research into that for these drugs?
Well, look, the Novo Nordisk discloses very common side effects like nausea, some stomach issues, some rare side effects like thyroid cancer. But they don't disclose, and what's emerging is the stomach paralysis issue that, some people are reporting that the digestive system, the stomach basically stops working. Food just kind of sits there, and these effects seem to be very long lasting. There's emerging research around these side effects. And generally speaking, we just don't see these, we don't have enough of a discussion around the issues around body image. We see anorexics and people with body image issues becoming addicted to these drugs who don't need them. These are not people struggling with obesity. These are not people struggling with diabetes. These are people with some other psychological issues going on. Now, but just broadly speaking, these drugs used for weight loss are relatively new. Semaglutide, which is the drug, which is marketed as Wegovy and Ozempic, it was only approved for weight loss, I believe, about 2 years ago. It's relatively new. Pfizer, Eli Lilly, Amgen have GLP drugs coming to the market. This is all a relatively new class of drugs, and especially in terms of interventions for weight loss. And just generally speaking, Bree is right about this rare U.S. dynamic where we're one of the, I believe, two or three countries that allow direct-to-consumer TV advertising of drugs in this manner. We see this kind of new dynamic in the last 30 years where drug makers are also, paying dozens, if not hundreds, of patient advocacy groups and think tanks in DC and other outside groups to create a market for their own drugs. We saw this with Roche and Genentech creating a market for Tamiflu. They basically concocted fake news stories and paid off politicians to lobby the government back in 2006 to demand that the Bush administration buy $1 billion worth of Tamiflu. We saw this with Purdue Pharma and OxyContin, where they paid off, pain advocacy groups, patients with pain, to create and manufacture this demand that physicians prescribe more OxyContin and other dangerous opioids. We see some of that dynamic with the vaccine debate, where the vaccine manufacturers very surreptitiously, in a stealth way, lobbied for a lot of the vaccine mandates. Not to say that any of these drugs don't have some merit, but we see this dynamic happening over and over again in society, where pharma companies manufacture grassroots, what appears like grassroots demand for their products. They manufacture lobbying and other kind of dynamics that you see in the media, where you see, where there's kind of a appearance of a mass demand for their products that produces billions of dollars in profit. And I see this dynamic here, and I think the evidence is very clear from my reporting this week that an aspect of this is happening with the GLP drugs.
Well, thank you for that reporting, Lee. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.